Supporting Leeds is going to make me lose my mind, isn't it? Leeds United have been relegated. Probably. I'm not going to lie, I'm filming this a week before. That's how unconfident I am in getting a result against Tottenham. However, as much as some people want to say that it's recent results that have screwed the club or the decision to hire Sam Allardyce, it's actually a problem that's tracked back more than 2 years. I'm going to take a look at the problems in player recruitment, staff recruitment, and ownership to really burrow down and see where the problem started and how clubs can avoid it in the future. Now, the first real problem is the players that Leeds United picked up in transfer markets when they were coming into the Premier League in the first place. There was an issue with the first year strategy that caused problems with the second and the third, and it was just a domino effect. Now, in year one, the club invested quite a lot. They got players such as Rafinha and Rodrigo up top, Robin Koch and Diego Llorente in the middle. They didn't do too much in midfield, but for the most part, the club was okay. It was reasonably well balanced. It was a really good transfer market for a Premier League club. However, some issues then emerge when you realise that that first year of transfer activity was meant to do 2 years of football. And honestly, there were some gaping holes left in that squad. They needed a left back, they needed a central midfielder, they needed a centre forward, and that was at the very least. In the end, the club signed two players. Junior Firpo at left back, fair enough. Dan James didn't need a winger, and he ended up playing at centre forward for most of the season, so that wasn't very good. Ultimately, last season's failure meant that there were still holes in the squad, and the club nearly got relegated. So surely last summer is the perfect time to fill in those gaps, right? Right. Wrong. So, the club brought in, and I'm going to read this because it was quite a lot of players to fill not a lot of gaps. Brendan Aronson, attacking midfielder. Jorginho Rutter, sort of a false nine, not a striker. Luis Sinisterra at left wing. Tyler Adams, actually a defensive midfielder. That one was good. Rasmus Christensen at right back, still not a left back. Max Vuber, centre back that sometimes plays at left back. Mark Rocker, another midfielder. Fantastic. Nonto, another left winger. Weston McKennie, another central midfielder. And Gil Robles, a free goalkeeper. Now, if you're keeping count, there's still not a left back and there's still not a striker. And at the same time, you're probably thinking the club wants to keep a little bit more depth up front. No, they loaned out Tyler Roberts and Joe Gelhardt, both of whom play up top. Ultimately, this transfer business has spiraled into hundreds of millions of pounds, and really it's caused more problems than it's solved. It's a really unbalanced squad at Leeds, and that's why no coach has been able to get anything out of it. But on the subject of coaches, Leeds United came up from the Championship with one of the most highly regarded coaches on the planet. Marcelo Bielsa led a high-pressing, high-action style of football that loved to have possession. They created chances time after time after time, and the basic rule was, you can score however many you like, we will outscore you. Bielsa had one full season in the Premier League, in which he got ninth place, and he struggled through the second season, but a lot of that was likely down to injuries. Bielsa wasn't the problem, it's what came after that was. Jesse Marsch was the next person to take over the job, and to be fair, he promised another high pressing style of football, but the idea of possession was just gone, like that. Rather than Bielsa's idea of sort of have the ball and work complex situations with possession and force chances through just creativity, Marsh's idea was have a shot within 8 seconds. That means forcing the ball forwards, rushing, trying to pressure the other defenders, and it doesn't really work in the Premier League. You're against players that are too good for that. The club also basically forgot to defend during this period. You can press from the front, but that means you're losing structure towards the back. And since there were two pressing managers in a row, you sort of lose a little bit of organisation in defence. So by the time Javi Gracia comes in and tries to make a more organised defence, you've got players that don't know how to defend and have forgotten how to have possession, and at the same time have lost their fitness because that's all Bielsa worked with. If you add to the equation that Leeds United took forever to get coaches to support Jesse Marsch, including hiring Chris Armas in January and then sacking Marsch in February, you've got a real problem. You've got players that don't have coaches telling them what to do in tactical systems they're not used to. It just doesn't add up. However, something that the owners were making sure added up throughout this period were the finances, and that's for a fairly selfish reason. Now, as a lot of people know by this point, Leeds United owner Andrea Rodrizzani is considering selling the club to the investment arm of the San Francisco 49ers. It's not the football team itself, it's sort of their investment arm in which they get various billionaires and millionaires all on board to buy a football club. And obviously, if you're trying to sell a football club, you want to make sure it's a good enough asset to get rid of, and that means paying a lot of attention to the finances. A lot of fans have had a theory recently that Andrea Rodrizzani isn't investing as much as he could in the club because he just wants to get a bit more profit out of it. Obviously, from a business point of view, that makes sense, but as a supporter, it's really frustrating. The 49ers have owned just under half of the club for about a year now, if I'm trying to remember rightly. But that means that at the board level, there's multiple parties trying to make every single decision, and it just doesn't add up. It means that there's sort of paralysis, and everyone has to run decisions by someone else. And yeah, it's a club that hasn't made important decisions, and that's arguably because we don't know who's meant to. Take earlier in the season, for example, right before the World Cup, Leeds were looking kind of bad and should have probably replaced the manager. But then we beat Liverpool and Bournemouth and narrowly lost to Spurs, and Victor Orta persuaded Andrea Radrizzani to keep the manager on. And that sort of paralysis again meant that Marsh was in charge during the transfer window, which meant that his successor couldn't make transfer decisions, and it all spiraled from there. I think to cut a long 2 year long story short, in essence, it's an issue with the ownership making good decisions. The ownership thinking that they are smarter than they are when looking for solutions. For example, the need of a centre forward this January. There's lots of options available. Just look at the Championship. Victor Gyökeres, I think is his name, at Coventry. Hope I didn't butcher it. But he's very clearly quite good. And instead, we spent £35 million on Jorginho Rutter, who doesn't start and isn't a striker. It's all about simplifying decisions and making the right choices, even if they're not ones that make you feel good about the fact that you spent a lot of time thinking about them. Basically, player recruitment needed to follow a better structure, manager recruitment didn't think about tactics enough, and at the ownership level, just get a bit of clarity. That's it. Sorry if this turned into a little bit of a rant. Like and subscribe if you want to. Comment below what you thought about the entire situation and what your take is. I read them all, I'll reply to them all. Yeah, let's hope we win the championship. See you later.